Today on the show, I have the pleasure of speaking with Jonathan Tuttle. Jonathan is the fund manager at Midwest Park Capital, which is a private real estate investment firm providing accredited investors with exclusive access to high-yielding investments in the mobile home park space. Jonathan is also the founding director of a digital marketing agency called Revenue Ascend, which helps small businesses generate powerful leads and conversion systems, marketing automation and follow-up, dynamic call tracking, and detailed analytics. To top it all off, Jonathan was selected by Habitat for Humanity Youth Board as one of the top social media influencers in Chicago. So I'm really pumped and excited to have him on the show today to share his incredible knowledge and insight into the space, that what he does and what he does best. G'day, Jonathan. Welcome to the show. How you doing today, mate?
Thank you, man. Thank you for having me on. I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Mate, my pleasure. The first question I ask all my guests as they come on this show is rewind the clock and tell me how you made your first ever dollar as a kid.
Well, that's a great question. So I grabbed my little red wagon and went door to door and sold rocks and flowers from our garden to my neighbors, and went door to door. So I got used to selling to people face to face and use that money to buy toys at Toys R Us.
Awesome. And rocks, what type of rocks were you selling?
Just random rocks. I was like a 5 or 6 year old kid. Like, hey, you want to buy some rocks?
I remember as well.
They didn't say no.
There's a picture of me selling small bags, and like I'm talking, like a sandwich bag, like a Ziploc of like dirt from my parents' garden. Like, I don't know, looking back, like the product wasn't very good, right? Like, who's going to use a small bag of sandwich dirt? It was a small sandwich bag of dirt filled with rocks and nothing of any good use, but awesome stuff. So bring us into your journey through what you've created today. Did you have a day job before you started in your current role? And I'm also very interested with a follow-up question about the ecosystems you've created with your two different businesses today.
Sure. Great questions. So I did I'm 41 now, but in my 20s, I did retail sales. And I did BB, which is like back in the day, it was like, malls, pre-COVID, pre-e-com, boom. Malls were the spot to go. So in my 20s, right out of college, I went, I liked fashion, and like I worked at BB, and like, I just wanted to make cute girls, and that was like the spot to go to. And then being the number one seller in the country, it was making good income, like $150, $160 a year. But the whole time I saw my dad, he was a real estate developer. I saw all the sides of what he did with real estate, and he got into mobile home parks at the same time I got into BB. And so like when I saw that, he's like, this is literally the best real estate that he's ever seen. And knowing my dad and being in the business for, real estate side of all different components of real estate for, 30, 40 years, I'm like, okay, let me save up to buy my first mobile home park. And so that's kind of got me into the whole mobile home park space. I was doing the retail during the day. That was my 9 to 5, I guess you'd call it. And then 2010 hit. Crazy, 2000 actually, 8, 9, but like our store actually did really well up until like mid 2009. And then, craziness happened. So I'm like, let me get my real estate broker license. I've already want to get into mobile home parks. And then I just transitioned into brokering and then investing into mobile home parks. But literally to see that avenue, like the mobile home park space, was the only thing that did really, really well in our portfolio during the last downturn. So that's what got me really excited about it. So I'm like, hey, if I could do, the craziest, economic downturn, this is something interesting I should get involved with. So
Interesting. And so when was your first purchase of that mobile home park?
2005. 5, 6.
Wow.
Yeah,
so what were the cap rates like
end of
back
5,
then?
early 6. Yep.
What was the cap rates like back then? Because that would have been a space like...
That's the golden era. That's the golden era. And I was lucky because my dad gave me like, I put a little bit in. He did most of it because he just wanted me to get involved with the space. But yeah, that's the golden era. So when you talk to mobile home park people, and you're involved, obviously, the multifamily side. So the big thing was like mobile home parks. Like if you talk with mobile home park people, it's not the story that everyone wants to pitch you 5 years ago, because now everything's compressed because everyone knows about the space now. Internet happened, podcasts happened. Everyone knows about it. Everyone knows about the mobile home parks. But back in the day, cash on cash would be like 18 to 30.
Wow.
And and then like a normal park would be 10 to 12. And like not like in the middle of nowhere. It would be they're always in the second and tertiary market, but like a quality asset would be 10 to 12. Those same parks and same assets today are like 6.5, 7. So like that's just to show you the compression and how much demand has come into our space. And it's been eye opening, and like it's obviously validated the business model, but that was the golden era. That's not come back. So when people say, hey, 10 cap or 8 cap on mobile home parks, yes, there are, but there's always going to be some hair on the deal. So it's not the same as 5 or 6 years ago. Fannie Freddie came out, started financing a bunch of our deals. All that changed the game. Back in the day, it was, just ridiculous cash on cash and insane cap rates. Not anymore.
So how are you looking at the business changing so rapidly over the last 25 years, and how have you kept up with not the demand, but probably the demand from your investors to keep acquiring quality assets? How have you done that with such a changing landscape?
Yeah, great question. So the challenging landscape, it's an industry focus driven. So industry. So there's about 44,000 communities in America. It's very mom and pop driven. People that have been in the space 5 or 10 years are going to go to the trade shows, they know the brokers, drive through the parks, talk to the people on a day-to-day basis. They know, like, and trust. It's just like any industry. They know, like, and trust. You're going to get the deal flow. And that's the biggest component. And the old school park owners, like the mom and pop guys, if you could provide that value to them, or like, hey, I'm coming to you as like, I own own a couple parks. I'm not going to be some big private equity, even though we're, a small fund. We're not big private equity. We're not buying, $500 million in real estate or anything like that crazy. We're just like small owners. We love the space. We want to keep your legacy, keep your tradition, throw some technology behind it. That's what we want to do. And so that's kind of our value prop to the owners, and to the investor side of it is like, this is industry ripe for, disruption, basically, because it's just like, think of Farmer Joe could, develop a mobile home park in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and has this huge cash and doesn't even know, doesn't have efficient payroll systems, doesn't have, doesn't even understand the internet, and still one of is proven resistant, recession resilient real estate. So we bring in some efficiency models, we bring in some technology, and then take what they do and then improve upon it and just keep everything in records. That's the investor side of it. We could bring the efficiency model to it, and technology advances to it.
And so where primarily are you buying your parks these days as the market has compressed?
Yeah, so we like the Midwest because that's coastal cities, private equity. If you talk we're in the Midwest, so obviously Midwest Park Capital, so Illinois, Wisconsin, Indiana. Even we like Texas also. We have in our PPM, we also have Tennessee. So we like states that are not coastal focused, because that also has the high cash and cash return, and it's not as compressed. Basically, you get I'd say 100 basis, 1 to 150 basis higher than the coastal stuff, if not more.
Interesting. And then from a metrics point of view, what do you like to look for when you're analyzing a market? Because that's been the biggest thing that I've always looked at. And I've interviewed a lot of mobile home park investors on the show, Kevin Butt being one of them, yep. Bryce Robertson being another one, guys who are in the industry and know it really, really well. What do you look for to make sure your parks are being filled and the occupancy is healthy throughout, a potential recession, which we've just come through in COVID?
Yeah, so actually our industry, to give you context behind that, our industry, there was Wells Fargo is the biggest financier for our industry for loans, and they said as of September, October last year, one of the major trade shows, SECO show, 94-95% collection rate. So even with all the COVID, and remember, the average lot rent's $350, $400. So if they get a $1,200, $1,400 check, and they've had 3 of them now, and then now we even have some of our tenants, we had, if you have 2 kids, they get a $55, $5,500 check. That's more than their whole lot rent for 16, 18 months. So that also factors into people paying on time. And then additionally, about 50-55% of most mobile home park tenants across the country, I don't know, our industry is not, the data is not as aggregate as multifamily. It's not super professional data. We just have to base it on, and it makes logical sense, but we can't say, hey, it's based on this study. It's not as, it's not, when you're talking to private equity, they have their own data, but 55% of it's about senior citizens, and senior citizens obviously have a social security check. So we don't have to worry about, economies, different downturns. And then also, if you look at most mobile home tenants, most now are going to $15 an hour, and Illinois is going to $15 an hour, and most states are going to $15 an hour. So that only benefits us. And then if you look at the average, we, as us as investors, we want to buy just the land, and the actual parks are just a cash flow, like a land lease communities. And then the actual lot, they actually have just own their own home, and they pay $10-15 a month in insurance. And where else can you pay $10-15 to own your own home and have that own community? Like if you want to, for example, for the context, if you were in Illinois, which is really high real estate taxes, across the street, so the mobile home might be like $100 a year in real estate taxes, $100 a year. Across the street, it's $3,000 for a $100,000 house. And so you always have this influx of people wanting to come in because they see the savings, because basically just paying the taxes is less than their actual real estate. Like that's less than what they actually pay for the entire year. So
Right.
You always have an influx of that. And that's what really provides that value. And so our industry gives us a lot of room for error because of those dynamics, basically.
Interesting. And what's been the biggest thing or lessons you've learned coming through COVID? I know I've learned a lot in the multifamily space, but what have you guys learned in the mobile home park space during the last 12 months?
Well, if there was green sheet data, and you're probably familiar with green sheet data. So they did a study on like all the different commercial real estate asset classes, and we had a 12% increase in value. The next closest was e-com stores. E-com stores had about a 10%, or industrial, I should say. Industrial properties had based on e-com stores. And we were those two niches were the only ones that really did above positive increases in cash flow based on the previous year. And so obviously retail got crushed, triple net lease got crushed, hotels, all these different other asset classes got crushed. And those drivers, so we didn't really have the challenges, and we've always known this for our industry, we didn't have those challenges other industries really had because it comes down to supply and demand economics. You can't really develop new parks. It's cost prohibitive. And we always have a huge influx of people that need affordable housing. And there's approximately 60 million Americans that need affordable housing. Where else can you live for $300 or $400 a month?
Right.
So, and so we didn't really have those challenges, which is like, it's such an anomaly. And so when you talk to people, they're like, they get it, but they're like, it's literally that, it's such an anomaly and such a game changer from other real estate classes. But there's also downsides. The downsides is you can't buy, there's not abundance of parks to buy. So, and you can't just buy, $100 million park. So if you have all this, so when we talk to like family offices, they're like, oh, we want to buy it. We love the space, but we want bigger deals. So you have that drawback. So it's like their sweet spot is like the $3 to $5 million deals. And we don't really, or maybe $3 to $10 million deals, especially if you're in like Florida or some of like coastal cities. And we just don't have the challenges of other real estate, but we also don't have the advantages of like scale of other real estate. So.
And that's an interesting point that you bring up, because there is so much big money from the coastal cities wanting to invest in high yielding assets. Multifamily is not that anymore. It used to be. Mobile home parks, you're talking about how it's been compressed so much over the last 25 years. And then coupled with the fact you can't scale. But in saying that, you're now getting Freddie and Fannie getting involved in the lending space, which attracts those private equity firms into the space. So it's like this real weird concoction of stuff going on, and you're trying to appease everyone. The private equity, obviously Freddie and Fannie are involved, so that's in bringing more people in. But you want the scale, but you can't have it because there's only limited buy. So it's this really, really weird. It's like hamstrung on all sides. Like, you think about, they talk in the multifamily side space, or stick below $20 million because you won't get the institutions, the institutions coming and bidding everything up. But then you got the other side of the coin where every man and their dog is bidding it up, who's a newbie investor who wants to get involved in multifamily. But it's interesting. You have a ceiling, right? You have a ceiling there, and it's not getting any bigger, and you can't force it. The industry can't force it. So how do you remain competitive? And maybe this brings up to your technology company that you've got about getting those leads, getting the right in front of the right sellers in order to keep your business going and to continue to grow some sort of scale over a period of a couple of years.
Yeah, no, that's you paint a great picture. Like, we understand there's like a 5-year run, and like other funds, like you mentioned, some of the other fund managers, they also have another angle. So they have like, Kevin has parking lots, I think it is. There's another fund that has self-storage. They always have some other component. And I understand that when you're raising more capital, they need to deploy. They just can't be like, hey, we have to look for one park and we have so much capital coming in, but we can't just put it on one park because of, scarcity works to their disadvantage, like we alluded to. So, so one of the ways you find deal flow is it's literally, we understand there's a 5-year run. So like, I'd love to be doing this 20 years from now, but it's not like multifamily or assisted living centers or other niches where we could be like, hey, we could just do a fund every 2 years for the next 10 years. It's not, we understand the dynamic. And we also understand the dynamics that we probably have to have next fund. We're going to raise more and we're going to probably have another component. So we're probably looking to RV or assisted living centers. So we understand that dynamic. It really comes down to relationships. So when you alluded to the technology side. So like the last MHI, which is the biggest Congress and Expo, which is the biggest industry trade shows. I was one of the 12 main speakers last year, pre-COVID, and they canceled it. So they did a webinar. So, but I was doing the technology side, how to grow how to bring in better clients. And so just being in front of that demographic as a thought leader on stage, National Expo, big owners, private equity, everyone sees you. So you have, those relationships like, oh, by the way, I'm actually, sourcing, buying deals myself. So just having that relationship, that's our angle. And then also we could do, obviously, Facebook, Google, LinkedIn. If you Google anything, literally Google anything like, mobile home park fund, investment funds, Wall Street, private equity, mobile home parks, we're number 1 or 2 everywhere nationally. So, my agency did all the digital marketing side of it, so we could rank and we have that positioning and brand positioning. So that kind of brings us lead flow from that. And then for the investor side, we could say, hey, we know how to operation. We could get, even though we know the dynamic is like, supply and demand, we know how to market this better. And that's the big thing. Private equity loves our industry because there's a lot of mom and pop guys. They don't now know how to throw up a Facebook or Google ad. Like they literally don't even have a website half the time. So it's to give you context, it's like, and I've been in some other mobile home podcasts. It's like we're 15 years behind multifamily. It's literally that bad, and which is good. So it's great for investors. But like for people like us and some of the other syndicators and funds, like we have the opportunity to run with this for the next 5 years because of that dynamic. It's great. So, but people looking outside in like, wow, it's like 10 years, 15 years behind.
It reminds me of the old adage about digging for gold, right? It's not in the digging and finding the gold. It's actually the guy who makes the most money supplying the spades and the shovels and the ropes and the tarps. And you're in that industry.
In the map.
In the map. You're in that industry where it's so compressed because that was the gold. The cash flow was the gold. The 17 to 30% cash on cash back in early 2000s. Now it's compressed and will continue to compress, I could imagine, because when you have a limit, you're only going to continue to compress. So you have to then be the supply store to that gold mine, right? So this analogy, you're the technology company, right? You have to develop your systems. And I was actually talking, Kevin Bupp has been on the show a couple of times. He's a good friend of mine. But how he's talking about just something simple that I take for granted on the multifamily side, property management. There's no national property manager for mobile home parks, right? And that's just that blows your mind when you think about it closely, right? So what are the major buckets from the technology perspective, whether it be advertising or property management or lead gen or just collecting revenue from the property? What technology pieces are you seeing the most influential in the mobile home park space, like that gold digging analogy I just talked about?
Yeah, so there actually is one group that actually is, but they're not national. So to your point, they're correct. It's M. Shapiro. That's their biggest property management. They don't do coastal cities though. So M. Shapiro, they do mostly from the Rocky States to I think Florida, but they're in our region. They're the biggest property manager. That's who we're using. They have about 34,000 lots under management. They have I think Apollo and Blackstone is, obviously two biggest private equity firms, 2 of the 3 biggest private equity firms in the world. So they manage their portfolio. But in the technology side, it comes down to a lot of just the basic, just the operational efficiency. So for example, for our fund, we have a login portal. I'm going to sell the other funds have this too, but just having a portal, you can see the, acquisitions we're doing, communication. And then for, there's a couple different property management softwares. They're not that great, but I mean, there's still room for improvement. But the real picture is just using technology and just kind of implementing. It comes down to like just the marketing side of it and just keeping track of everything. So like being efficient, keeping track of all your data, systems, processes, that's the key. Because remember, we're dealing with Farmer Joe developed the park in 70s, 80s, and 90s. Most of their books, it's not in QuickBooks. It's probably in a piece of paper. Here's like 20 pieces of paper. That's what I do. And then also my daughter, who doesn't even work in the park, she gets, $80,000 a year salary. So just having taken that, underwriting correctly, putting it into systems of process, and actually having, QuickBooks and actually efficient models, that's half the battle. And then another half the battle is, we do a lot of marketing. So I get, sometimes small owners will call me, like, sometimes we'll have $30,000, $40,000 salaries for, small parks, like 50, 75 units. I'm like, that should be $5,000 or $8,000 salary, $7-10. And there's no reason to pay somebody $35,000 to go collect, $150,000, $200,000 in rent. That doesn't even make logical sense. But you see it all the time. You see it all the time in your industry. That's huge for us as investors and just operational efficiency. So like little things like that. It's such a unique industry because the biggest challenges obviously are the grandfather laws, and like the city is, don't really like parks, and obviously that's why we have to lower taxes generally. But the big thing is a lot of times you have the old school owner, second, third generation owner that literally is not maximizing the property because they don't care. They developed in the 70s, 80s. It's completely paid off. They're multimillionaire. They have $400,000 or $500,000 a year coming in, and they live in a second and tertiary market where the average house is $150,000. They're kings. It's like having a $20 million house in LA, equivalent. Like when they have that much more than the average person in your town, they're not looking to maximize the rent and be operational efficient. They're happy.
No, I love it. How do you get the people on the parks, and maybe you just answered that, is still the old school ways, to try and transition them to like a rent cafe or paying online so you don't have to have that manual labor? Or is it just so far gone that most of your tenants just like, no, I can only collect the rent through a warm body walking door to door, knocking on the doors?
Well, I'm familiar with Rent Cafe because my luxury buildings have used it for the last 5 years. And they're actually coming out with a platform to come into the mobile home park space, and they're trying to like perfect it. And what they're trying to do, and they just actually called me like 2 days ago, but they haven't got, because they're really big in the multifamily space, but they haven't got a platform exactly correlates to your question, because they haven't like figured out the small town. Like some people will have to drop off the check at the Walmart, the Casey's, or whatever the local gas station is. And so they're trying to figure out a way to do that and integrate with the banks. So great question, because our industry is like, it's got some weird anomalies. Like, like when you're dealing with, Rent Cafe and your, apartments, the average national apartment is $1,200, and like a luxury apartment in most cities, like, $2,500 to $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 a month. Most people just throw in their credit cards, direct, withdrawal from the bank. When you're dealing with somebody that makes significantly less, money becomes a different issue. So that's the biggest hiccup there right now. So, what you typically do is we work with, like, for example, our personal parks, we have like local community banks where they just drop off the check. And then we have like a 5-day, just like a regular apartment building where they have 5 days to get it in. And then we don't care about we're not looking to get the $50 late fee. That's not our business model. But we just want to encourage them to pay on time. And so but the thing is, they know which our niche is great because they use their Social Security. And if you have Social Security, you just work with them. Sometimes, like, for example, if it's like somebody that's just barely getting by, we won't try to squeeze them out, like obviously want to raise rents every few years and, park efficiencies, bring in, better amenities. But if it's like a senior citizen that just getting by, well, like, hey, we'll power wash that for free. We'll paint that unit for free. Even if it's $300 or $500, we'll just do that because that also creates a better community for everyone else. Like, oh, she just did hers, it creates a community feel. So yeah, it's, we obviously want to maximize it. We make our cash and cap rates, but just doing a little, it's kind of giving back to the people that need it the most. So I think we'll go back to your question in regards to the payments. That's kind of the biggest thing. But most, they pay on time. Like we already know that the 94, 95% collection rate. And we don't like to have it with the managers. We want to have it with a local bank or like a rent manager type system. So.
Interesting. I always like to hear about that stuff. And that's, again, the technology that I take for granted in the multifamily space that I feel would
commonplace,
would be awesome. But then you've got to go back to who your demographic is, right?
Yeah.
And I'm sure a lot of, and I'm not trying to paint a broad brush here, but maybe a lot of them don't have bank accounts, right? They're paying through checks or cash, and it's just a different mindset of how they handle their money. And so thus can only bring them so far, right? You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. So having all these technologies,
that's one of my favorite quotes.
having all these technologies, people might not even use it because they don't have the back end system set up themselves personally to have it from a credit card to a bank account to pay you. It's more old school way of going and getting a cashier's check and then having to pay it at a petrol station and get it into your account. So that seems to be some of the biggest challenges to these technology companies trying to break into an industry that has historically been set in its ways in terms of how people are paid.
Yeah, you're 100% right. And so you have that. So from the investor side of it, taking over the park, it's like, okay, we want to mitigate the office manager. And the office manager, we don't want to have, cash in a box that's sitting in there. We don't want to have somebody that can take the cash and be like, hey, they didn't pay. So you want to mitigate that risk. Whereas like somebody's distrustworthy, they can just pocket one person per month, two per month. That's $500 extra money per month to them, $6,000. And you never know. People, if cash is in front of them and they didn't have to go deposit, like they could say, hey, Sarah didn't pay or Bob didn't pay the bill, and then he pocketed those $400. Like, no, I dropped it in the box. Like, so we want to eliminate that. So we want to say, hey, drop it onto like a bank or use like an online paying system. And then obviously you have like the credit card fees. So then you want to charge, 3.25%. We always, I even for my digital agency, I was like, hey, just the convenience fee, it's 3.25% or whatever. I'm not making money on it. I'm just paying, the credit card processing fee, but like saves you time driving, or wasting gas going there. So, but yeah, you're 100% right. Just our industry is different because we're dealing with a different demographic, like you alluded to. So some people might be working in different industries where they might be busy for a few months and then they have to let the money flow, and so they can't have a direct deposit, so they have to put in the credit card or whatever they have to do. And so just being cognizant of that. And so the technology companies have the biggest issue of like, how can we integrate this where it's like streamlined, where it's like, hey, we have one check coming in, 20 checks at the bank, Walmart, Dropbox here, and there's a couple different software companies that are trying to figure it out, but they haven't figured it out yet. We have conversations, but they haven't really figured out to be optimized. But for optimization for technology, the angle is marketing side, Facebook, websites, and then just keeping track digitally instead of on a piece of paper. Yep. So like, hey, the office manager rates this, this person paid on a piece of paper. No, like, where is it at? When they pay? So it's all streamlined, and then there's actually some softwares too now that you could actually, put a red or green box if they paid like kind of on the monopoly side. It's kind of cool. So.
And you let the property management company deal with all that, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Cool.
And we just oversee it, and then just being it's basically trust but verify, Ronald Reagan, over the shoulder management, see the cash flows, and then also being boots on the ground. So like, in our industry is like. Or any other industry, like when your properties, you pop in once in a while, keep people on their toes on a Tuesday.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just pop in on Tuesday. Like, oh, I didn't expect you. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. No,
they never know. And it's 7:00 on a Thursday. Like, oh. So then they're like, oh, he could be here between here or at 9:00 on a Sunday.
Yep. And that's the business of real estate, regardless of what industry you are in, is making sure it's a people management game, right? It's always about making sure the tenants are paying. If you don't have the tenants, you don't have a business. But making sure the people who are stewarding the checks or the money or the overseeing the books are doing it correctly, because you don't want the business to be stuffed up. So there's a lot of moving pieces, but it all comes down to that management of people and having good expectations,
100%.
having
and
good
quality people,
and that comes down to a little bit of quality culture in the business, making sure you're empowering people, not just dictating them and saying, hey, you need to do this. It's like making you're bringing from a leadership point of view. And those, you talk about the spot checks that you come in on a Sunday or a Thursday night, it's more to keep them on their toes, but also to help set a precedent that, hey, nothing's going to slip through the cracks here and we want to run a tight ship. So yeah, completely love that stuff. So my question as we come to the end of the show is, where's the industry going? Like we've got this ceiling on you said 44,000 parks across the country. There's only that many parks going to be built. Yep. Unlike multifamily, it seems like a new multifamily has been built every 2 seconds.
Yep.
It's affordable. People want to be in it. So are you, what are you seeing? Where are you seeing the industry going, considering that you've been involved, from 20 years ago when you had some incredible golden years, as you said earlier?
Yeah, no, 100%. So here's where we're seeing. So if you go to like the trade shows, there's a couple big trade shows, MHI in Vegas. There's mobile home show for actually the homes in Louisville every year. There's a couple of smaller trade shows. One in Mississippi. Everything has been canceled last year, obviously, besides early last year. And so you have two schools of thought. So you have the tradition, like the new school, private equity, the fun guys, like, okay, we're going to take advantage of this time. We're going to improve the operational efficiencies. We're going to, like, another thing you have to think of too, a lot of these old school guys, the mom and pop, some of these guys have just literally just blooded the properties dry. So you come in, you could actually, fix the units, bring in a better quality tenant, bring in new rules and regulations, put in new roads, trim the trees, all the, throw in a little dog park, a little red fire hydrant. like just think like a Class C apartment, so a couple amenities. But now you can charge and throw in a bingo room, like you charge, $50 ethically, and they're like, hey, we put in all this, and we have to pay new taxes because we took it over, obviously, taxes changes. So you have the two schools of thought where it's out there that just dilapidated and didn't, they ran into the ground. If they had 50, 60 years, they didn't put the CapEx into it. They just hey, I already have this cash flow coming in. The new school guys are like, hey, we can bring this in, and this is like affordable housing, so we can take this to the next level. Then the government's the other third party. They're like, hey, we don't really like this because either the stigma or the taxation or, it's just this great area. There's a lot of grandfather laws. So the biggest thing, if you're doing this secondary, tertiary markets, there's very few. If you ever see, there's some cities that might have grandfathered. They might have had a park pre-developed before some, buildings came around it. But most of the time, it's always second. It's 30 minutes outside the city, 50 minutes outside the city, 3 hours outside the city. And those are still cash flow. But you're never going to see one I'm in Miami right now. You're not going to see one downtown Miami. Right. It's never going to happen. They'd rather have the taxation purpose for the city, did it in the, the people don't want to see that. And so the new schools thought of it as hey, we can bring in the new homes. The average new home is about $80,000. The Clayton Homes is the biggest. They develop about 50% of new homes. Warren Buffett's the biggest. He owns it actually. Berkshire, and they develop about 50%. There's about 100,000 new homes a year. And during the 90s, there was a big rush. There was I think 300,000 to 400,000 homes, but they had these crazy long 30 traditional, home finance banknotes. But then the thing about mobile homes, they don't actually go up in value. Typically, it's kind of depreciating an asset. So it's kind of like buying a car. It's considered a title, and most that's basically what it is. And there's a certain point where it kind of breaks even, but if you buy a $15,000, $20,000 mobile home in most states, it'll probably break even for 5 or 10 years. But you save the money, the equity portion, on the taxes. You're not paying. Remember, I said when you $150,000 house in Chicago, or outside this Illinois, or even outside of Chicago, $3,000 a year. A mobile home, 20 minutes away or across the street, $100 a year. That's your equity. $3,000 in savings and tax bases. So the new school thought is kind of hey, how can we take this to the next level? This should be the no affordable avenue. We're looking for, Section 8, there's such a shortage of affordable housing. This is the industry. We have the tiny house movement. We can see, now we're seeing some stuff in LA. They're saying, hey, these little pods and AUDs, I think they're called like auxiliary something.
Access dwelling unit.
Yeah. So trying to solve that problem, but it's kind of like there's two things going at the same time. You have the old school guys and then the private equity trying to take it to new level, and then the government saying, hey, we're trying to figure this out ourselves. So it's going to be fascinating to see, but like for the investor side, if you're looking for investor side, if it's $80,000 for the new, $50,000 to $80,000 for new home, plus if it's $50,000, you have to actually bring in the, is the infrastructure set in, is like all that stuff set in, usually $10,000 to $15,000 a pad. Okay, so it's basically developing a subdivision, but way cheaper, about third price of like a small, single family house in a secondary tertiary market. Okay, but if you're developing 100, 200 units, that's $6, $8, $10 million. That kind of deplete, so the investor side of it, they're like, hey, we'd rather buy a cash flowing property that already is established. We already know the cap rates. The bank's going to finance it. Fannie Freddie is going to give incredible terms because they have the Duty to Serve Act, which they have to allocate 37% to affordable housing, which we're the biggest proponent of it. Let's just take something that's already cash flowing, put in operational efficiency. So we have these two different ball games, and it's going to be fascinating to see. But I think the industry is, in my personal opinion, I think the industry is going to be, the private equity, it's going to be super consolidated. It's like when you talk to any of the assisted living people, or not assisted living, self-storage people and some of the other niche, alternative assets, we're like 5 years behind, 5 to 7 years behind. And I think 5 to 7 years from now, it's going to be just a regular asset class. And there's going to be some room and angles, but it's going to be all relationship driven at that point. And it's going to be just a normal real estate class at that point. I'm not going to be super excited about it. I like helping people and providing the affordable housing, but it's not going to be like, oh my gosh, this is like the best real estate. It's such a, it's like the orange cloth, I think the big idea. It's not going to be the big idea anymore. It's going to be like, okay, I've heard of that, but that was 7 years ago.
Awesome stuff, mate. Well, look, at the end of every show, we like to dive into the top 5 investing tips. It's a lightning round of 5 questions. You ready to get into it?
Let's do it.
Mate, what is a daily habit you practice to keep on track towards your goals?
I think working out every day. Waking up every day, working out, being focused. And when I didn't do that, it gives, you can see the difference. It gives the energy. And so, I didn't have a bang today, but if I had normally bang, I'd be talking 3 times faster. But just giving that energy and just be all day, get through the challenges and tribulations every day. It just gives that tenacity, basically.
Awesome. Question number 2 is, who is the most influential person in your career to date?
Most influential, I'd probably say James Cook, my former partner. I'm going to see him tomorrow. I'm in Miami right now. Probably the best broker probably in the industry from a loan park space. And when we partnered up, he was so light years for his age. He was so light years of anybody I've ever seen in the brokerage side or business side from our age group. I was mind blown. He was he just saw opportunities that I learned how to discover opportunities and create value and being creative that I'd never discovered from anybody else I ever met before.
Awesome stuff. What is the number or the most influential tool in your business? And when I say tool, I mean it could be a physical tool like a phone or a journal, or it could be a piece of software that you use and you can't run the business without. What is it?
I would say my phone, because I have my phone and my laptop, literally if you see my browser right now, I have 100 apps and so I can't just define it as one. I love technology, obviously, as a digital agency side, so I can't just define it one. I guess if you want to define it as one, I think it would be Slack, just for efficiency and communication. But overall, I love softwares. I just love being efficiency, tracking everything, and just having just the resources on your fingertips like this.
Love it stuff. All right, in one sentence, what has been the biggest failure in your career, and what did you learn from that failure, or that lesson, I should say?
I would say the last downturn, I bought a house, condo, 2006, and it was, Naperville, Illinois. It was the number 2 country, all these different magazines are hey, this is one of the best places to live in America, best schools, best place to raise a kid. I'm this could be a great investment. And I learned that Illinois is terrible for residential, at least. And B, I'd rather buy commercial properties. I could get, if I want to buy something, I want to have an income producing property that gives me the tax benefits, that gives me the stability and the cash flow to buy whatever else I want from that cash flow from the commercial real estate side that's stable. And so learning that your early age was a great benefit.
Awesome stuff, mate. And final question is, where can people reach you to continue the conversation? They want to be in your sphere. Where do they go?
Yeah, so we have two websites. So Midwest Park Capital, that's the kind of general overview, and then MidwestParkCapitalFund.com. That's kind of that's the PPM. So if they're a accredited investor and they actually want to, divide it more into the details, that's the way to go. And then they just log in and we give them an account.
Awesome stuff, mate. Well, look, I want to thank you so much for jumping on the show today. I think I had a really good conversation and understanding of where you think the mobile home park industry is going. It's so interesting to see a person like yourself who's been investing since the early 2000s. You've seen that compression come. And then where do you think it's going, given that it's got a ceiling, but also given the incredible opportunities from a technology point of view of bringing it into a space that is being quite archaic? And my analogy about the gold digging, and it wasn't necessarily the digging for the gold that made you the money. It was actually the guy who was selling the spades and the wheelbarrows and the ropes and the supplies to go and dig for that gold. And I think it's the same. It seems like it's the same space right now for technology companies to come in and really, really disrupt the industry. Did I leave anything out in that summary?
No, you're 100% right. And then the opportunity is one of the funds like us. That's the easiest way to get involved in the space. And we always tell our investors invest in a couple of funds. If you're looking to get in the space, it's way easier to learn from other people that have the experience, the track record, and the deal flow, and especially off market, and have the systems process and systems already in place. Take advantage of that. It's going to be so all the stuff you see online for the deal flow. It's every deal that's online that you see in front of everyone else has already been passed on, just like multifamily. So 100%. Take advantage of the people that have the deal flow. If you want to get in the space, it's a great niche. Let the experts kind of run with it, multiply your money, take advantage of the tax benefits, and help the space.
Awesome stuff, mate. Well, look, I want to thank you again for taking some time out of your day to jump on the show. Enjoy the rest of your week, and we'll catch up very, very soon. Awesome stuff. Well, there you have another cracking episode jam-packed with some incredible stuff from Jonathan. If you are interested in learning about anything he does with his mobile home park space, remember to head over to midwestparkcapital.com. Check everything out over there. Definitely doing some incredible stuff in the technology space as well to disrupt an industry that is blowing up in literally the terms of so many people coming to invest in that space. So you want to be investing with someone who knows exactly what they're doing. I want to thank you all again for taking some time to tune in to continue to grow your financial IQ. And the easiest way to give back to this show is to give it a 5-star review on iTunes. Give it a big thumbs up. Thank you very much if you do take the time out to do it. And we're going to do it all again next week. So remember, be bold, be brave, and go give life a crack.